Barron Trump, the enigmatic youngest son of America's most polarizing family, stepped into the spotlight on a day that promised to be monumental. But no one could have guessed just how earth-shatteringly wild it would turn out. Something amazing, outrageous, and downright jaw-dropping unfolded. A spectacle so intense it's already being called the greatest public showdown of 2025. Picture this: Barron, towering and unflappable, facing off against a rabid Zelensky fan whose obsession spiraled into chaos. Yet what Barron did next was so hilariously brutal, so shockingly unexpected. It left the world gasping. This isn't just a story. It's a roller coaster of emotion, controversy, and pure, unfiltered intrigue that'll hook you from the first breath and keep you guessing until the very end. The morning of March 6, 2025, dawned crisp and golden over Washington, D.C., the air buzzing with a restless energy that seemed to ripple through the city's marble corridors and cherry blossom-lined streets. Barron Trump, now 19, strode purposefully toward the National Mall, his 6'7" frame cutting an imposing figure against the backdrop of the Lincoln Memorial. His dark blazer hugged his broad shoulders, his blonde hair catching the sunlight in a way that made him look less like a political heir and more like a young titan stepping into his own legend. Today wasn't about his father's legacy or the endless media circus. It was about something personal, something he'd poured his quiet intensity into. A speech to launch a nationwide homeless charity initiative he'd spent months building from the ground up. The mall was a sea of anticipation, its vast lawn dotted with thousands, volunteers in bright orange vests, homeless advocates waving banners, and a throng of curious onlookers drawn by the Trump name. A wooden stage stood at the center, flanked by massive screens projecting Barron's every move, while news helicopters thrummed overhead, their blades slicing through the morning calm. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. The crowd pulsed with a mix of hope and skepticism, their murmurs swelling as Barron approached, his long legs eating up the distance with a stride that radiated confidence. Cameras clicked furiously, drones darted like eager insects, and social media feeds lit up with speculation. This was Barron's moment, a rare glimpse into the man behind the myth. But beneath the surface of this noble scene, a shadow lurked. Among the sea of faces, one stood out, a wiry man in his late 30s, his gaunt features sharpened by a sleepless zeal. He wore a faded blue jacket, a Ukrainian flag pin glinting on the lapel, his eyes locked on Barron with an intensity that bordered on feral. Known online as Zelensky's Torch, he was a self-proclaimed crusader. His ex posts a relentless stream of vitriol against American apathy and the Trump dynasty's perceived sins. He'd traveled from New York overnight, fueled by coffee and conviction, his backpack stuffed with flyers and a megaphone he'd clutched like a talisman. Today, he wasn't here to cheer. He was here to destroy. The stage gleamed under the morning sun, its podium adorned with a simple banner: "Shelter for all." Volunteers bustled around, handing out water bottles and pamphlets detailing Barron's plan, a network of youth shelters funded by private donations, a cause he'd championed since his teens. The crowd swelled as the clock ticked toward 10 a.m., their anticipation thickening the air like humidity before a storm. Barron climbed the steps, his movements deliberate, his presence commanding silence without a word. He adjusted the microphone, his long fingers steady, and surveyed the faces before him, thousands of eyes reflecting hope, doubt, and everything in between. Security lined the perimeter, their black uniforms blending into the crowd, their earpieces buzzing with routine checks. They'd noted the Zelensky fan's arrival. He'd been flagged on X for inflammatory posts, but he blended into the masses, his jacket unremarkable, his megaphone still tucked away. The atmosphere crackled with potential, a perfect storm brewing under the guise of a charitable triumph. Barron cleared his throat, the sound amplified across the mall, and the crowd leaned in, hungry for his first words. This was his chance to redefine his name, to carve a path beyond the shadow of his lineage. But fate and one unhinged activist had other plans. The Zelensky fan edged closer, his boots scuffing the grass as he maneuvered through the throng, his pulse racing with the thrill of the hunt. He'd spent weeks plotting this moment, tracking Barron's appearances, waiting for a stage grand enough to amplify his fury. His hand brushed the megaphone in his bag, its cold metal a promise of chaos. The crowd didn't notice him yet, their focus riveted on Barron, but a few heads turned as he pushed past, his sharp elbows drawing annoyed glances. The air tightened, a prelude to the explosion no one saw coming, and Barron, unaware, unshakable, began to speak, his voice rolling out like thunder over the mall. Dmitry Volkov, once a boy from Kiev, now a man consumed by a cause, stood at the edge of the charity event crowd, his pulse racing as Barron Trump's speech built toward its crescendo. The megaphone in his hand felt like an extension of his will, a tool to amplify the voice he believed the world had muted. His backstory was a tapestry of loss and defiance. Born amidst Ukraine's turbulent early independence, Dmitry had watched his family fracture when war crept closer. His father, a journalist who dared to expose corruption, disappeared one winter night, leaving behind a notebook filled with half-finished articles and a teenage son who inherited his stubborn fire. Fleeing to America with his mother, Dmitry grew up straddling two worlds, one lost to him, the other indifferent to his pain. Zelensky became his beacon, a symbol of resistance and hope, and Dmitry's obsession took root deep, fed by every news report, every speech, every flicker of Ukraine's struggle on the global stage. In Brooklyn, his life was a shrine to that obsession. His apartment walls bore the scars of his devotion, maps pinned with red threads tracing conflict zones, newspaper clippings yellowing at the edges, and a corner dedicated to Zelensky, where photos and handwritten quotes formed a chaotic collage. Online, he was Zelensky's torch, a relentless presence on X, his posts a mix of rallying cries and bitter accusations aimed at anyone he deemed complicit in Ukraine's suffering. He'd abandoned a steady job years ago, surviving on freelance translation gigs and the occasional donation from his small but fervent following. His days blurred into nights spent debating strangers, his nights into mornings packing his apartment, plotting ways to keep Ukraine's plight alive. Rallies, protests, even a disruptive stint at a UN event. He'd done it all, each act a spark he hoped would ignite a wildfire of awareness. The charity event, though, was different. Barron Trump's involvement turned it into a lightning rod, and Dmitry saw an opportunity too potent to ignore. To him, Barron wasn't just a young man raising funds for the homeless. He was a Trump, a name Dmitry associated with policies and postures that had emboldened Russia's aggression. The event's noble cause didn't soften his view, it sharpened it. He saw hypocrisy in Barron's polished words, a gilded mask hiding a legacy of inaction. Dmitry's plan was simple yet audacious: disrupt the speech, hijack the microphones, and force the crowd and the cameras to hear his truth. The flyers in his backpack outlined Ukraine's latest casualties. The megaphone would carry his voice over Barron's. He didn't care if they arrested him. Silence was a greater prison. Meanwhile, Barron's presence on stage underscored the double-edged nature of public figures in charity work. His involvement had transformed the event from a local fundraiser into a national spectacle. Donations had spiked, 6 figures in a single week, thanks to his name alone. Celebrities tweeted their support, corporations pledged matching funds, and news vans lined the street, their cameras trained on the tall, blonde 20-something who spoke with a quiet intensity. His speech wove a vision of shelters rebuilt, communities healed, and futures reclaimed, and the crowd hung on every word, some moved to tears, others nodding in cautious approval. Yet the shadow of his surname loomed large. Critics online called it a publicity stunt, a calculated move to polish the Trump image after years of controversy. Supporters argued it was proof Barron was carving his own path, distinct from his father's bombast. The truth was murkier. Barron had pushed for this project himself, investing personal funds and months of planning, but he knew his name amplified both the good and the scrutiny. That amplification came with risks. The event's focus wavered under the weight of his celebrity. Reporters asked more about his family than the homeless crisis, and political activists like Dmitry saw a platform to settle scores. It was a paradox charity organizers wrestled with. Public figures brought resources and visibility, but they also dragged baggage that could eclipse the mission. Barron felt that tension as he spoke, his eyes occasionally flicking to the crowd, sensing the undercurrent of unrest. He'd prepared for hecklers, briefed by a security team that hovered discreetly at the stage's edges, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing. Dmitry, now mere feet from the stage, adjusted his grip on the megaphone, his thumb brushing the power switch. Barron's voice swelled. "We can be a nation that lifts each other up, that refuses to let anyone fall through the cracks." And the crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound Dmitry intended to ride. He scanned the security guards, their attention split between the stage and the exits, and calculated his window. The flyers rustled in his backpack as he shifted his weight, his breath shallow with anticipation. This wasn't just about Barron. It was about the world's selective amnesia, its willingness to cheer for shelters while ignoring war zones. Dmitry's fire burned for Ukraine, but it was Barron's spotlight he'd steal to make it blaze. As Barron paused to let the applause fade, Dmitry raised the megaphone, his voice ready to split the morning air. The guards hadn't noticed him yet, their eyes on a distant protester waving a sign. The crowd's focus remained on Barron, oblivious to the storm about to break. Dmitry's lips parted, a single word, "Listen," forming on his tongue, the prelude to a tirade honed by years of grief and grit. The moment hung fragile, a breath before the plunge, as two worlds, one of privilege, one of pain, collided in the shadow of a cause meant to unite. The morning sun blazed over the National Mall, casting sharp reflections off the stage where Barron Trump stood, his voice cutting through the crisp air. "We can be a nation that lifts each other up, that refuses to let anyone fall through the cracks," he said, his tone steady and resonant, each word landing with purpose. The crowd, a sprawling sea of faces, leaned forward, their applause building like a rising wave. Barron paused, his blue eyes sweeping the audience, a quiet intensity radiating from his tall frame. The moment teetered on the brink of triumph, until a voice, sharp and furious, tore through the stillness. "Listen!" Dmitry Volkov's shout blasted from a megaphone, its shrill pitch jolting the crowd. He stood at the forefront, his thin frame vibrating with energy, his wild eyes locked on the stage. A Ukrainian flag pin gleamed on his jacket, a symbol of his cause. "You talk of shelters while Ukraine burns," he bellowed, his voice thick with a raw, accented rage. "Your family's hands are stained with indifference." The megaphone turned his words into a weapon, splintering the event's calm. The crowd recoiled, murmurs rippling through them as applause faded into unease. Barron's head snapped toward Dmitry, a flash of surprise crossing his face before his jaw tightened with resolve. He stood motionless, his silence amplifying the chaos unfolding below. Security guards surged into the throng, their dark uniforms stark against the colorful crowd, but Dmitry moved like a man possessed. He sidestepped their reach, boots scraping the grass as he lunged closer to the stage, megaphone aloft. "You think charity hides your sins?" he snarled. "You think this erases the blood?" His words lingered, a direct challenge cutting through the morning light. The audience split, some booed Dmitry, their anger visceral. Others wavered, faces taut with uncertainty. Phones rose like a forest of antennas, live streams capturing every second while drones hummed overhead, their cameras zooming in. News helicopters roared louder, churning the air. Barron gripped the podium, his knuckles pale, but his voice remained calm as he spoke into the microphone. "This isn't the time or place," he said, firm and measured, a hint of steel beneath the words. "We're here for the homeless, not for politics." Dmitry's laugh was sharp and bitter, slicing through the tension. "Politics," he shouted, swinging the megaphone. "This is about lives, Trump. Lives your family ignored while Ukraine bled." He dug into his backpack, pulling out flyers, crumpled lists of Ukraine's dead, and flung them skyward. They drifted down like ash, scattering among the crowd. Security closed in, grabbing at his arms, but Dmitry wrenched free, his desperation fueling him. "You can't silence me," he roared, his gaze piercing Barron's. "You can't silence the truth." The standoff broke. A guard tackled Dmitry, sending the megaphone skidding across the pavement with a piercing screech. The crowd erupted, shouts, gasps, cheers, and protests clashing in a chaotic symphony. Barron stepped back, his face composed, though his eyes flickered with something sharper, anger or recognition of the moment's weight. Guards pinned Dmitry, cuffing his wrists as he glared up at Barron, a defiant grin breaking through his exhaustion. "You'll remember this," he spat, his voice carrying to the nearest cameras. "The world will." As security hauled Dmitry off, his boots dragging on the asphalt, his accusations echoed until they faded. The crowd buzzed, their focus split between outrage and fascination, phones still rolling. Barron returned to the microphone, exhaling slowly. "Let's not let one man's anger overshadow why we're here," he said, his voice steady but strained. "We have work to do." The applause was weak, the crowd's spirit dampened by the upheaval. The media ignited. Headlines screamed within minutes. Trump charity event derailed by Zelensky fanatic, and Barron Trump faces down activist in explosive clash. Social media exploded with clips. Dmitry's rant, Barron's response, the scuffle fueling a polarized storm. Some lauded Barron's poise, others decried his family's baggage. Donations poured in, but the event's purpose blurred under the spectacle. In a holding cell, Dmitry slumped against the wall, wrists bruised, his confiscated phone alive with unseen messages, support vitriol and news alerts. He'd sparked a fire, but its burn had outpaced his intent. Barron, meanwhile, shook hands with organizers, his smile tight, his mind grappling with the day's cost. The speech ended, the funds raised, but the clash had shifted the ground beneath him, a stark reminder of the battles tied to his name. The air in Barron Trump's private office hung heavy with tension as he ended the call with his father. Donald Trump's words, "Everything's a war, son," echoed in his mind, a stark contrast to the mission he'd set for himself. Barron had wanted to rise above the noise, to carve a legacy of compassion rather than conflict. But as reports of violence tied to Dmitry Volkov's growing movement flooded his inbox, that dream felt increasingly out of reach. The shelters he'd championed were under siege, donations were drying up, and the headlines screamed betrayal. Trump charity implodes amid protests. He rubbed his temples, the weight of his name pressing down like never before. Outside, the world was spinning into chaos. Social media exploded with footage of the DC shelter attack, masked figures hurling bricks, their shouts of "No Trump blood money," punctuated by shattering glass. The video had already racked up millions of views, fueling a firestorm of debate. Some hailed the protesters as patriots exposing the Trump family's hypocrisy. Others decried them as thugs undermining a noble cause. Caught in the crosshairs, Barron faced a choice: retreat into silence or fight back on his own terms. Meanwhile in Brooklyn, Dmitry Volkov's apartment had become a war room of its own. The activist paced furiously, his phone buzzing with notifications he couldn't bear to read. His latest post had ignited a movement. #Truth for Ukraine was trending nationwide, but the cost was spiraling beyond his control. The threats, the violence, the shattered windows, it wasn't what he'd envisioned. He wanted to shame Barron, to force the Trump dynasty to confront its past, not to endanger innocent lives. Yet the fringe elements of his followers had seized the narrative, twisting his crusade into something monstrous. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. It was Anya, a Ukrainian immigrant and one of his most loyal supporters. Her sharp features were taut with urgency as she stormed in, a tablet clutched in her hand. "Dmitry, you need to see this," she said, thrusting the screen toward him. It was a live feed from a protest outside a Trump-branded hotel in Chicago. Hundreds of demonstrators waved Ukrainian flags and chanted his name, but the scene was turning ugly. Police in riot gear clashed with the crowd, tear gas canisters arcing through the air. "They're calling it your revolution," Anya snapped. "You lit the match, and now it's burning everything." Dmitri's stomach twisted. "I didn't tell them to do this," he muttered, but the words felt hollow. Anya's eyes narrowed. "You gave them a target. What did you think would happen?" She paused, then softened. "Look, I get it, you're angry. We all are. But if this keeps going, it's not just Barron who will suffer, it's us. Our cause." Before he could respond, his phone lit up with a breaking news alert. FBI investigating threats linked to Volkov campaign. Dmitri's blood ran cold. The feds were involved now. His name was poison, and the movement he'd sparked was slipping into a legal and moral abyss. He sank onto the couch, torn between doubling down and pulling back. The stakes had never been higher. Back in Washington, Barron's team scrambled to salvage the charity initiative. His advisor, Claire Hensley, a seasoned PR strategist with a knack for crisis management, paced the room. "We've got two options," she said, her voice clipped. "One, you go dark, let this blow over and hope the shelters recover. Two, you go big, call out the violence, distance yourself from the politics, and double down on the mission. Photo ops at a shelter, maybe a new funding pledge." Barron shook his head. "Going dark isn't me, and photo ops feel cheap." He stood, towering over the desk. "I need to speak directly, no filter. Get me a platform, Claire. Not another interview, something raw, a live stream." Claire hesitated. "That's risky. No script, no safety net. If you slip, it's live for the world to see." But Barron's resolve was set. "I'm done playing defense," he said. "Set it up." Within hours, the announcement went out. Barron Trump addresses nation, live at 8 p.m. EST. The internet buzzed with speculation. Was this a meltdown, a counterattack, a plea for peace? Whatever it was, it promised to be unmissable. At 8 p.m. sharp, Barron appeared on screen, standing alone in a bare room. No polished studio, no teleprompter, just him. His navy blazer was gone, replaced by a simple black sweater, his blonde hair slightly tousled. He looked less like a Trump heir and more like a young man wrestling with a storm. "I'm not here to defend my family," he began, his voice steady but raw. "I'm here to talk about what's real. Shelters are being attacked. Good people are scared. And for what? Because a guy with a megaphone decided I'm the enemy." He paused, his gaze piercing the camera. "Dmitry Volkov, I see you. I hear your pain. But this isn't helping Ukraine. It's hurting the people I'm trying to lift up." The chat exploded, supportive cheers clashed with vitriolic insults. Barron pressed on. "I'm not my father. I'm not a politician. I'm a kid who saw suffering and wanted to do something about it. If you hate me for my name, fine, but don't burn down what I'm building because of it." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "And to the ones throwing bricks, stop. You're not heroes, you're bullies." The stream cut off abruptly, leaving a stunned silence online. Within minutes, reactions poured in. Supporters hailed Barron's courage. Critics called it a privileged tantrum. But the real shock came an hour later when a new player entered the fray. Donald Trump took to Truth Social with a post that set the internet ablaze. Barron's got guts, proud of him, but Volkov and his thugs, weak, sad, time to shut this down, law and order, folks. The message was vintage Trump, brash, divisive, and gasoline on an already raging fire. Pro-Trump factions seized on it, organizing counter-protests under the banner, "Stand with Barron," while Dmitri's followers raged at the escalation. Then came the bombshell. A leaked audio clip surfaced, allegedly from a Trump campaign insider, claiming Donald had pressured Barron to go soft in the livestream to avoid alienating MAGA voters. True or not, it fueled a conspiracy that Barron's raw moment was a calculated ploy. The controversy deepened, splitting even the Trump base. Some saw Barron as a fresh voice, others as a liability. In Brooklyn, Dmitri watched the chaos unfold, Anya at his side. The FBI investigation loomed, the protests raged, and now Trump SR was in the ring. "They're turning it into a circus," he muttered. Anya nodded grimly. "And we're the clowns." Dmitri's resolve hardened. He opened his laptop, typing a new post. "Barron wants peace, prove it. Meet me face to face. No cameras, no games, let's end this." The challenge went viral, a dare neither could ignore. The nation held its breath. What would Barron do? In a sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the Potomac, Barron Trump sat alone, his phone screen dark but his mind racing. The weight of his name had never felt heavier. His live stream had been a gamble to reclaim control, to speak directly to the people, but it had only deepened the divide. Now Dmitri's challenge, a private, unfiltered meeting, hung in the air like a dare. Accepting could be seen as weakness, a capitulation to a fanatic. Refusing might brand him as a coward hiding behind his privilege. The stakes weren't just personal, they threatened the charity he'd poured his soul into. Donations had stalled, shelters were shuttering, and his team was in damage control, but the chaos showed no signs of slowing. Claire Hensley, his PR strategist, paced the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "You can't meet him, Barron," she insisted, her voice tight with urgency. "It's a trap. He's unhinged, he'll twist anything you say, and the media will eat it up. You've already given him too much oxygen." She paused, softening slightly. "I know you want to fix this, but some fires can't be put out with words." Barron's gaze drifted to the window where the river glittered under the midday sun. "Maybe words are all we've got," he said quietly. "If I don't face him, this never ends. The shelters suffer, the cause suffers, and I look like I'm running." He turned to Claire, his blue eyes sharp with resolve. "Set it up. No cameras, no leaks, just me and him." Claire's protest died on her lips. She worked with the Trumps long enough to know when a decision was final. "Fine," she sighed, "but we need ground rules, neutral location, security nearby, and a clear exit strategy." Barron nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere, on the man who'd turned his mission into a battlefield. In Brooklyn, Dmitry Volkov's apartment felt like a bunker under siege. His laptop screen glowed with a flood of notifications, supportive messages from his followers, death threats from strangers, and a barrage of interview requests from journalists hungry for his next move. The FBI investigation loomed like a shadow, its weight pressing down on his every thought. His challenge to Barron had been a desperate play, a last-ditch effort to seize control of the narrative. But now, with the world watching, he felt the ground shifting beneath him. Anya sat across from him, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. "You've got their attention, Dmitry," she said, her voice low. "But what's the end game? You meet Barron, then what? You think he'll suddenly care about Ukraine, or are you just looking for a fight?" Dmitry rubbed his temples, his fingers tracing the lines of exhaustion etched into his face. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought if I could make him really see what's at stake, maybe he'd use his platform for something bigger, or maybe I just wanted to break through the noise." He glanced at the Ukrainian flag pinned to his wall, its colors faded but defiant. "But now it's spiraling. The protests, the violence, it's not what I wanted." Anya leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Then end it. Meet him, but make it about peace, not war. You've got a chance to turn this around for Ukraine, for the shelters, for yourself." She paused, her voice softening. "Don't let your anger destroy you, Dmitry." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a private message. It was from an unlisted number. "Barron accepts. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., location to follow. No media." Dmitry's breath caught. The gauntlet had been picked up. The news of the meeting leaked within hours, despite both camps' efforts to keep it quiet. A rogue tweet from a protest organizer, "Barron and Dmitry to face off tomorrow," set the internet ablaze. Speculation ran wild. Was this a peace talk or a prelude to more chaos? Would it be a shouting match or a handshake? The public's fascination reached a fever pitch, with betting pools popping up on everything from who would speak first to whether punches would be thrown. Just as the anticipation peaked, a new player entered the fray. Maria Sanchez, a prominent activist and founder of Homes for All, a rival charity, saw an opportunity. She'd long criticized Barron's initiative as a vanity project, and now, with the controversy boiling over, she sensed a chance to seize the spotlight. In a blistering op-ed published that evening, she wrote, "While Barron Trump plays the martyr, real charities are doing the work without the drama. This meeting is a circus, not a solution." If he truly cared, he'd step aside and let those without baggage lead. The piece went viral, adding fuel to the fire. Sanchez's followers flooded social media with calls for Barron to cancel the meeting and redirect his funds to legitimate organizations. The backlash was swift and brutal, with Trump loyalists branding Sanchez an opportunist and Barron's supporters accusing her of exploiting the chaos for clout. The charity world, already strained, fractured further, with some leaders siding with Sanchez and others defending Barron's intentions. Barron read the op-ed in silence, his jaw clenched. Claire, monitoring the fallout, shook her head. "She's trying to bait you," she said. "Don't take it, stay focused on tomorrow." But Barron's frustration simmered. He poured everything into this cause, and now it was being torn apart by egos and agendas. Still, he knew Claire was right. Tomorrow's meeting was his chance to cut through the noise, to confront Dmitry and perhaps find a way forward. Meanwhile, Dmitry wrestled with his own doubts. Sanchez's op-ed had struck a nerve, echoing his own fears that the meeting might devolve into spectacle rather than substance. He paced his apartment, rehearsing what he'd say, but the words felt hollow. Anya's warning lingered in his mind. Make it about peace, not war. Could he? Or was he too far gone, too consumed by his own fire? The next day dawned gray and heavy, the sky over Washington, D.C., thick with clouds. Barron arrived at the meeting spot, a nondescript conference room in a private club secured by his team. He wore a simple gray hoodie, his towering frame folded into a chair as he waited, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going." Security lingered outside, their presence a silent reminder of the stakes. Dmitry arrived minutes later, his face gaunt, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. He wore a faded blue jacket, the Ukrainian flag pin still gleaming defiantly. The two men locked eyes across the room, the air between them crackling with unspoken tension. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence stretching taut. Then Barron leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "Why are we here, Dmitry?" Dmitry's lips twitched, a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "To see if you're more than just a name." The words hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation. The meeting had begun. The conference room door slammed shut behind Barron Trump and Dmitry Volkov, sealing them off from the chaos of the protest outside. The muffled roar of the crowd, shouts, breaking glass, and the wail of approaching sirens seeped through the walls, a constant reminder of the stakes they faced. Barron leaned against the wall, his hoodie damp with sweat, his chest heaving from the adrenaline of their failed attempt to calm the mob. "That didn't work," he said, his voice rough but steady. Dmitry, his face pale and drawn, shook his head as he brushed shards of glass from his pant leg, the remnants of the bottle that had nearly struck him. "No," he admitted, his tone quieter now, almost reflective. "But it was worth trying." Their eyes met, and for a moment the hostility that had defined their encounter softened into something else, a shared recognition of the mess they were both entangled in, a storm neither had fully anticipated nor could fully control. Claire Hensley paced the room, her phone pressed to her ear as she barked orders to security. "I don't care how many there are, get more people down here now, and keep the press back." She ended the call with a sharp jab at the screen and turned to Barron, her expression a mix of exasperation and urgency. "This is spiraling, Barron. We need to get you out of here before it turns into a full-blown riot." Barron pushed off the wall, his jaw set. "I'm not running, Claire, not yet." He glanced at Dmitry, who stood rigid, staring at the floor as if wrestling with his own thoughts. "We started something out there. We need to finish it here." Dmitry's head snapped up, his dark eyes narrowing. "Finish it? You think a few words will fix this?" He gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the chaos beyond. "They don't want talk. They want blood. Yours, mine, doesn't matter anymore." "Then why are you still here?" Barron shot back, stepping closer. "You could have walked away the second that bottle flew, but you didn't." Dmitry's lips pressed into a thin line, his silence stretching as he searched for an answer. Finally, he exhaled, his voice low and raw. "Because I'm tired, Barron, tired of yelling into the void, tired of hating you for things you didn't do." He paused, his gaze dropping again. "My father, he'd tell me to stop fighting ghosts. maybe he'd be right. The admission hung between them, fragile and unexpected. Barron studied him, the anger in his own chest giving way to curiosity. "What happened to him?" he asked, softer now. "Your father." Dmitri's hands clenched at his sides, then slowly relaxed. He was a journalist, wrote about corruption, about the war, kept going even after the threats started. One day he went to meet a source and didn't come back. His voice cracked slightly, but he steadied it. They found him in a ditch. No investigation, no justice, just another body. Barron swallowed, the weight of the story settling over him like a cold fog. "I'm sorry," he said again, meaning it more this time. "I can't imagine." "No, you can't," Dmitri cut in, but there was no venom in it, just exhaustion. He sank into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "That's why I came after you. Your name, it's tied to people who let that happen, who looked the other way. I wanted you to feel it, even a fraction of it." Barron pulled out the chair across from him and sat, leaning forward. "I get it, more than you think." He hesitated, then pressed on. "I didn't choose my name, Dmitri. I didn't choose the baggage. Every time I try to do something, anything, it's dissected, twisted, turned into someone else's fight. I'm not my father, but I can't escape him either." Dmitri looked up, his expression unreadable. "So what? You're a victim too. Is that what you're saying?" "No," Barron said firmly. "I'm saying I'm trying to break the cycle. The shelters, the charity, it's not a PR stunt. It's me trying to do one damn thing that's mine." He leaned back, his eyes searching Dmitri's. "You want me to see your pain? I'm starting to, but I need you to see what I'm fighting for too." The room fell silent again, the distant clamor outside a stark contrast to the stillness within. Claire, who'd been hovering near the door, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is touching, really, but we're still in a crisis. The crowd, not dispersing, and the media's spinning this into a war zone. We need a plan now." Barron didn't break eye contact with Dmitri. "What if we go public, together? Not out there," he nodded toward the door, "but a statement, something official. Show them we're not enemies." Dmitri frowned, skepticism etched into every line of his face. "You think words on a screen will stop this?" "No," Barron admitted, "but it might slow it down, buy us time to figure out what's next." Claire nodded reluctantly. "It's not a bad idea. If we can control the narrative, get ahead of the leaks." She pulled out her phone again, already typing. "I'll draft something, but you both need to agree on it." Dmitri leaned back, crossing his arms. "Fine, but it's not just words. If we do this, you commit to something real. Meet with my people, refugees, survivors, hear them out. No cameras, no spin." Barron didn't hesitate. "Deal. And you come to one of my sites. See the shelters, the families we're helping. No agenda, just the truth." For the first time, a faint, grudging smile tugged at Dmitri's lips. "You're stubborn, I'll give you that." "Says the guy who started all this," Barron replied, a hint of dry humor in his tone. Claire clapped her hands, breaking the moment. "All right, truce later statement now. Here, what I've got. Barron Trump and Dmitry Volkov met today to address recent tensions surrounding the Trump Foundation's charity initiative. We acknowledge the pain and division on both sides and are committed to dialogue over conflict. More to come as we work toward understanding." Short, neutral, leaves room to maneuver. Barron nodded. "Works for me." Dmitri tilted his head, considering, then shrugged. "It'll do, for now." Claire sent the statement with a swift tap, then looked up, her expression grim. "It's out, but don't get comfortable. The crowd's still growing, and Maria Sanchez just tweeted that she's on her way to support the people's voice. This isn't over." Barron and Dmitri exchanged a glance, the fragile thread of their newfound understanding tested but holding for the moment. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, a tentative bridge had been built. Whether it would hold under the weight of what came next remained to be seen. The hum of the crowd outside swelled into a restless roar, a sea of voices clashing in chants and shouts. Barron Trump and Dmitry Volkov stood near the window of the charity's headquarters, peering through the blinds at the chaos below. Maria Sanchez had just arrived, her presence igniting the already volatile scene. Flanked by a small entourage, she climbed onto a makeshift platform, megaphone in hand, her sharp gaze sweeping the crowd. The mass of people surged toward her, a mix of cheers and jeers erupting as she began to speak. "People of DC," Maria's voice boomed, cutting through the noise, "we're here because we're tired of empty promises and fake charity. Barron Trump's shelters aren't progress, they're a distraction. While he plays the hero, real activists are fighting for justice. Don't let him fool you." The crowd split in response. Some cheered wildly, hoisting signs that read "Homes, not handouts," and "Trump, charity equals Trump, ego." Others pushed back, shouting, "Give him a chance." "And you're the problem." The air buzzed with tension, teetering on the edge of violence. Police in riot gear tightened their line, shields up, while news drones hovered above, capturing the escalating drama. Inside, Claire Hensley's phone buzzed incessantly, her screen flashing with security updates and frantic messages from the charity's board. "This is spiraling," she said, her voice tight as she glanced at Barron. "Maria's turning it into her stage. If we don't do something, it'll explode, and the shelters will pay the price." Barron's jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the scene outside. "She's using this to climb the ladder," he said, his tone laced with frustration. "But she's not wrong about one thing. Words alone won't fix this." He turned to Dmitry, who stood stiffly beside him, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. "We need to go out there, together. Show them this isn't just another feud, that we're serious." Dmitry's eyes flicked to Barron, narrowing. "You think they'll care?" He nodded toward the window, where the crowd's energy was boiling over. "They're not here for unity, Barron. They want blood, yours, mine, anyone's." "Maybe," Barron admitted, stepping closer. "But if we stay in here, Maria controls the narrative. The shelters get torched, figuratively or literally. And whatever we agreed to in here," he gestured to the table where they'd hammered out their fragile truce, "it's dead before it starts." Dmitry exhaled sharply, dragging a hand across the back of his neck. "You're asking me to stand with you," he said, his voice low and rough. "After everything your family's name means to me, to them." He pointed at the crowd, then at the Ukrainian flag pin on his jacket. "I don't know if I can do that." Barron's expression softened, a rare glimpse of vulnerability breaking through. "I'm not asking you to erase the past," he said. "I'm asking you to help me stop this from getting worse, for your father's fight, for mine, for all the baggage we're carrying." The words struck a chord. Dmitry's mind flashed to his father's notebook, scribbled articles, a life cut short chasing truth. He glanced at his pen, its faded colors a quiet anchor. "Fine," he said at last, his voice gravelly but firm. "But we do it my way, no polished speeches. We talk to them raw, real, and if it goes bad, we're done." Barron gave a tight nod, a faint smile flickering. "Deal." Outside, the situation was unraveling fast. Maria's speech had lit a fuse, her accusations stoking the crowd's fury. "Barron Trump wants you to think he's different," she shouted, "but he's just another gear in the machine. Don't settle for crumbs." Her supporters roared while counter-protesters surged forward, their signs clashing in a tangle of wood and cardboard. Scuffles broke out, fists flying, and the police line strained to hold. Then the building's doors swung open. Barron and Dmitry emerged side by side, an unlikely pair that silenced the crowd for a fleeting moment. Camera flashes exploded, drones dipped lower, and all eyes turned to them. Maria's megaphone faltered, her composure slipping as she registered their presence. Barron raised his hands, palms out, a call for calm. "We're not here to fight," he said, his voice steady and loud. "We're here to listen, to talk, to figure this out." Dmitry stepped up, his gaze sweeping the sea of faces. "I came here to expose a lie," he said, his accent thick with emotion. "But I was wrong. This isn't about me or Barron. It's about the people who need help here in Ukraine, everywhere. We can do both. We have to." The crowd wavered, the anger softening into uncertainty, but Maria wasn't ready to yield. She lifted her megaphone, her voice piercing the fragile pause. "Don't buy it," she snapped. This is a PR stunt. They're saving face while the real problems burn. Demand more. The moment shattered. A bottle arced through the air, smashing at Barron's feet, glass splintering across the pavement. The crowd surged, a tidal wave of bodies crashing toward them, chants reigniting with venom. Security rushed to form a barrier, but the line buckled under the onslaught. Then a new voice broke through. A young woman, tears streaming down her face, shoved her way to the front, clutching a worn photo. "My brother in one of those shelters," she yelled, her voice cracking with desperation. "He's got nothing and you're out here fighting over names, over politics. Shame on you." She jabbed a finger at Maria, then the crowd. "Shame on all of you." Her words hit like a shockwave, cutting through the noise. The crowd stilled, some lowering their signs, others stepping back as her raw pain sank in. Barron moved toward her, his voice calm but resolute. "What's your name?" "Alina," she said, her hands shaking as she held up the photo, a faded shot of a young man grinning outside a shelter. "He's in your DC site, trying to get clean. If you close it, he's got nowhere." Barron met her gaze, his tone unwavering. "We're not closing anything," he said, projecting his voice for all to hear. "Not if I can help it." He turned to Dmitri, who stood beside him, his face etched with quiet intensity. "And we're not stopping there. We'll do more for everyone who's been forgotten." Dmitri nodded, stepping forward. "I've fought for Ukraine, for my father's memory," he said, his voice steady. "But Alina's right, this isn't about us. It's about her brother, about the people who can't fight." He looked straight at Maria, unflinching. "If you mean what you say, Maria, join us. Don't divide us." The crowd held its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Maria's face twisted, caught between defiance and doubt. She lowered her megaphone, staring at them, then stepped off her platform. The crowd parted as she approached, her steps deliberate. When she reached them, she stopped, her voice quiet but sharp. "Prove it," she said. "No more promises. Show me a plan, show me you mean it. Or I'll make sure everyone knows this was a sham." Barron extended his hand. "You've got a deal." Maria hesitated, then shook it, her grip ironclad. Dmitri followed, his handshake a silent vow. The crowd erupted, not in rage, but in a chaotic blend of cheers and murmurs, the storm's edge dulling into an uneasy truce. But as they turned to head back inside, Claire's phone lit up with a new alert. "BREAKING, Trump SR, to address nation on charity scandal, live in 10 minutes." Barron's stomach sank. His father's voice, unpredictable, bombastic, could unravel everything they just stitched together. Dmitri caught his look, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Round 2. Barron sighed, nodding. "Always." The charity headquarters, conference room, was a fortress of tension. The distant roar of the crowd outside, now a faint hum through the thick walls. Barron Trump, Dmitri Volkov, and Maria Sanchez sat around a polished table, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a laptop streaming Donald Trump's live address. Claire Hensley stood near the door, arms crossed, her sharp eyes betraying a mix of apprehension and weariness. No one spoke. The air was heavy with anticipation as they awaited the words that would either calm the storm or ignite it further. On the screen, Donald Trump loomed behind a podium, his red tie a bold slash against his dark suit, his face etched with a familiar blend of defiance and showmanship. "Folks," he began, his voice cutting through the speakers, "what's happening here is a travesty. My son Barron, great kid, tremendous kid, is out there doing something incredible, helping people, and these radicals, these troublemakers, they're trying to ruin it. It's disgusting. But let me tell you something, we're not stopping. The Trump Foundation is going to keep building shelters, keep lifting up the homeless, and anyone who gets in our way. They'll deal with me." The camera zoomed in, his gaze piercing. "This Dmitri guy, look, Ukraine's a tough situation, I get it, but don't drag my family into your war. Barron's not your punching bag, he's trying to help. So back off, pal, or you'll wish you had." He paused, then flashed a smirk. "And Maria Sanchez, she's just mad because she can't keep up. Always has been. Sad." The feed cut off, plunging the room into a stunned hush. Barron's hands clenched the table's edge, his knuckles whitening. "That's not what I asked for," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "He just made it worse." Maria leaned back in her chair, her expression hard. "He's not entirely wrong about me," she said dryly. "I don't trust you, Barron, not fully, but I'm not here to watch this crash and burn." She turned to Dmitri, who sat stiffly, his dark eyes stormy. "You two shook hands on this. I want in, but it's got to be legit. No grandstanding, no games, just the work." Dmitri let out a slow breath, staring at the blank screen. "Your father," he said to Barron, a faint, bitter smile tugging at his lips, "is something else. But he's right about one thing: I'm done fighting you." He met Maria's gaze, his tone softening. "I came here to tear it all apart. I was wrong. If we can make this real for Ukraine, for the shelters, for people who need it, then I'm in." Barron straightened, his jaw set with determination. "Then we make it real," he said, rising to his feet, his shadow stretching across the room. "We start with a statement, something simple, something that cuts through all this crap. No finger pointing, no agendas. Just us, committing to work together and get it done." Claire snapped into action, pulling out her tablet. "I'll write it up," she said, her fingers already tapping the screen. "But words won't be enough, Barron. The shelters are hemorrhaging money, and those protests aren't going anywhere." "I've got something," Maria said, her voice firm. "A unity event, not some polished press thing, but real on the ground. We bring out the people who have lived in the shelters, the refugees Dimitri's here for, and we let them talk. No suits, no scripts, just their stories." Dimitri's tired eyes brightened. "Yes," he said, leaning forward. "And we stream it live, unfiltered, show the world what's really at stake." Barron nodded, a flicker of a smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Let's do it, and I'll match every dollar we raise straight up, no conditions." The room hummed with purpose, the friction giving way to focus. Claire's typing filled the silence as Maria and Dmitri bent over a notepad, mapping out the event's details. Barron stepped to the window, peering out at the city below. The crowd outside still lingered, but their chants had softened, curiosity replacing rage as whispers of a new plan spread. 3 days later, a modest park near the National Mall hosted the Unity event. The setup was bare bones: a wooden platform, a few mics, and a growing crowd: shelter residents, Ukrainian refugees, volunteers, and passers-by drawn by the buzz. A single camera rolled, streaming live to anyone watching, no frills or fanfare. Alina, the young woman who'd faced down the mob days before, took the stage first. Her hands shook as she held up a photo of her brother. "He's still trying to get sober," she said, her voice cracking but steady. "The shelter gave him a shot. Don't let a name take that away." Then came Oksana, a Ukrainian refugee, her words halting but powerful. "My home gone, my parents too. Here I found a lifeline. Dmitri fights for us, but Barron does too. We need them both." One after another they stepped up, unpolished, unguarded, their voices carrying the weight of lived truth. Barron, Dmitri, and Maria stood off stage, watching quietly, their presence a backdrop to the real stars of the day. The live stream's numbers soared thousands, then millions. Comments flooded in, some snarky, some moved, but the tide was turning. The fury that had fueled the protests began to crack, giving way to flickers of connection. In the weeks that followed, the shelters found their footing. Donations crept back, then poured in as the event's echoes spread. Barron kept his word, doubling the funds and quietly adding refugee aid to the mission. Dmitri stayed, his anger now a force for building rather than breaking. Maria kept them honest, her no-nonsense oversight holding the fragile alliance together. The Trump name still drew heat, it always would, but the story shifted. The charity became less about legacy and more about lives, a shaky bridge between unlikely partners. One evening, as dusk painted the Potomac gold, Barron and Dmitri stood atop a new shelter's roof, the city sprawling below. "Did we pull it off?" Dmitri asked, his voice quiet, almost lost in the breeze. Barron shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. We started something, that's a win for now. Dmitri nodded, his eyes on the horizon. For now. They stood there, side by side, two men forged in conflict, now tethered by a cause, and a road ahead that stretched into the unknown together. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel. That way you'll never miss our newest uploads.